Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a really compelling pro-Trump worldview that frames what's happening right now not just as politics, but as a massive, high-stakes civilizational struggle. We're going to be breaking down the ideas coming from the channel Promethean Updates. So, to really get a handle on this perspective, we're just going to walk through the argument as the source lays it out. We'll kick things off with a key contrast it highlights from this past Easter. Then we'll unpack its definition of a globalist world order and what it sees as a resurgent U.S. spirit. From there, we'll look at how it portrays the leader at the center of all this, which leads to what it calls a fundamental civilizational choice. Okay, so the source starts its whole argument by pointing to what it calls a death hoax about Donald Trump that apparently spread over Easter weekend. It uses this quote to really try and illustrate what it sees as the desperate mindset of his opponents. But then, boom, the source immediately contrasts that rumor with two events it paints as huge American successes. And this contrast is really the whole point here. It's setting up the core argument that you have two completely different realities, one of decay and one of renewal, happening at the exact same time. Okay, so what's behind all this, according to the video? What's the force that's driving this negativity and, desperation? Well, it points to this big idea, this antagonist it calls the globalist world order. Now, the source defines this not as some friendly partnership of nations, but as a full-blown imperial system. The argument here is that phrase we hear all the time, rules-based international order, is basically just a cover for a structure that it claims has been systematically weakening the American Republic for decades. So the source breaks this down a bit more. The idea is that NATO isn't so much a defensive shield, but more like the muscle for these endless wars. The core argument is that this entire system is designed to benefit a tiny global elite, and it comes at the direct expense of individual countries' own power and sovereignty. And the video uses this quote from Macron as a perfect example. The argument is, they use these really nice sounding words, rule of law, fair trade, but it's all just a way to hide what's really going on. The source then points to actions like France allegedly undermining U.S. policy with Iran as proof of this. Okay, so you have this idea of managed decline on one side, but then the source builds up this complete counter-narrative, an American comeback story, and it goes right back to that same Easter weekend to find its evidence. But the first piece of evidence it points to is this pretty daring military operation, the rescue of 2 crew members from a downed F-15. But here's the kicker. And this is really important for the source's argument, the location. We're talking deep inside Iranian territory. So the video presents this as this incredibly bold move, right at a time of what it calls maximum tension. All right, the second big piece of evidence it brings up is the Artemis mission to the moon, highlighting the 4 American astronauts on the crew. And this is framed as a huge deal, a massive milestone in space exploration. Why? Because they're rounding the moon for the first time since 1972, which is presented as this signal of a return to American ambition and greatness. So you take those two things together, the rescue, the moon mission, and the video argues that this signals the return of something it calls the right stuff. It's this idea that this is a direct pushback against that whole era of lowered expectations. And to show that this isn't just about a couple of one-off events, the video points to a much bigger picture for the future. For instance, it brings up executive orders aiming to quadruple America's nuclear energy capacity by 2050. So it's about a long-term vision. Okay, so the video paints this picture of a resurgence in America, right? But it argues this isn't just happening on its own. It then pivots to what it sees as the main driver, the catalyst for all this change, a personally transformed Donald Trump. The narrative presented here is that a very specific chain of events, years of what it calls targeted prosecutions, leading all the way up to an assassination attempt, was basically the fire that forged him into a totally new kind of leader. And this is really the core of this part of the argument. The source makes this pretty powerful analogy comparing Trump's experience to Gethsemane. The idea is that going through all this, facing his own mortality, and deciding to keep going, created a leader who, in their view, can't be pushed around anymore. He can't be swayed by threats or pressure from what the video calls the empire. Yeah, this idea that he's been transformed into someone who just can't be intimidated, that's absolutely central to the whole argument the source is making. It's presented as the key to understanding why he does what he does and why he's able to challenge the old guard. And all of this builds to the source's final point, its ultimate conclusion, that this isn't just about politics anymore. This is a choice between 2 totally separate, totally irreconcilable futures. And the choice is framed in these really stark black and white terms. On one side, you've got what it calls the global empire, defined by things like managed decline and endless wars. And on the other side, you've got the American Republic, all about national revival and focusing on its own people and its own development. So the video wraps up by claiming that the old establishment is basically hoping for America to fail. And you might ask why? Well, according to the source, it's because the success of this new direction would mean the game is over for them. Their whole system would be done. And, as the video puts it, it would expose their crimes. So, by laying out these two totally opposite visions of the future, one it says is dying, the other just being born, the source really leaves its audience with this one big hanging question. In this civilizational showdown, what comes next?